Hi, Cara.
Hi, Vanessa.
I'm going to start this episode with a story. Now, just for listeners, in case you just pressed play and didn't look to see what the topic of today's conversation is, I will tell you, it's basically about how we can't force our kids to do what we want them to do, even when we know better and can see the future and have many, many more decades of lived experience, which dictates our perspective and opinion.
But we'll still try to figure out ways that we can make them do.
Right. Which doesn't mean capitulation and like giving up. It just means pathways to influencing our kids in healthy and supportive ways while also giving them the benefit of our wisdom and learned experiences that will allow them to make the choice that ultimately we hope they will make.
It was a very fluffy sentence.
Except that sentence is too long. It's a deeply offensive run-on sentence, and it certainly is not a title. It would be like the longest title of a podcast episode. Anyway, so the podcast is When We Can't Force Them. And I want to start with the story, Cara, because I'm in a situation with one of my beloved children, and he is a really talented performer. And he comes by it naturally. He is a fourth child, for starters, has an uncle who's a very talented performer. He has a father who's a very talented performer. He is just naturally really gifted. Except when I have said to him, hey, I really think you should do some acting, or take an acting class or take a musical theater class, he has told me that he does not want to do that. And I informed him, you're going to love this, that I was going to require him to take that class, which was met with, as you can imagine.
It's your fourth child, and this is your strategy.
Yeah, I mean, one would think I would have learned at this point.
Yes.
But I am so excited to have a kid who has this talent because let's just say some of my other kids don't. So that was met with stony silence. And now his siblings are actually going to bat for him about why I shouldn't force him to take this class. And my husband has now gotten into the fray here.
Whose side is he on?
Not on my side.
Oh,
even
everyone's
though
against you, Vanessa. This is hard.
Again, it's not personal. It feels personal, but it's not personal. But I'm really stuck. Now, we can force them to take a Spanish class, and we can force them, I mean, math they have to take, and some other things.
Someone else is forcing them to take math. Yes.
Right. But I do think there are things in their life that they are forced to do, but I am sitting with a conundrum and the clock is ticking on this particular thing because I think he would be amazing and he would love it. And yet he is refusing.
I'm going to add that I would imagine another element of what you're thinking is that not just would he be amazing and would he love it, but it would therefore boost his self-esteem. It would also build a whole set of skills for him. I mean, he is the most charming kid. He is adorable and he is funny and he is smart and he is sassy in all the right ways. And he's a great kid. But, learning how to take that performative quality from personality to stage, it really translates. It's so interesting to me. I listen to a lot of people who speak professionally about any number of things, but the most successful speakers, the ones who are the most charismatic and draw you in and can make their point in a way that resonates so clearly, regardless of what the point is, when you dig back through, like some huge percentage have a theater background. It's like they understand how to communicate.
Right. And so we're not going to make this all about theater, but I will say that being a performer, doing theater taught me a ton of stuff that was super useful, the most of which was trying out for something and not getting a part or not getting the part I wanted and taking the risk anyways. I actually listened to Jay Shetty and Scott Galloway's episode, and because you told me to, and I listened
It was good. It was very good.
And Jay Shetty, who's like this uber successful guy, his parents forced him to take public speaking. I think he said for 9 years.
Yes, it was a very long time.
I was like, wow, they were really sticking to their guns on that one. But he talked about how that has allowed him to do all of the many things that he's become incredibly successful at because he had this skill. Now, my kid is taking public speaking this year. So,
but your whole point here, and we're going to now extend it, broaden it, right? Go beyond just theater in high school. But your whole point here is sometimes we know what's best for them.
Yeah, I know.
Right? And they don't.
Right. And to your point is he is, as he should be, he's 14, figuring out what his thing is, right? Like what makes him and what makes, and you know, what are, I don't want this pressure about passions, but like when we had Jenny Anderson and Rebecca Winthrop on and they talked about the disengaged teen, what is the thing that keeps kids engaged in school? It's having something where they're in explorer mode, where they're pursuing something that interests them authentically with intrinsic motivation. And
that's right.
To me, I was like, oh, this could really be the thing. Now you're going to laugh. You are going to laugh because the other thing he loves is history. And he has to take, I don't know, sophomore year history, whatever that is. But he can also take minors and take additional history. So then I was like, okay, what if I strike a deal? Like he doesn't have to take theater, but if he doesn't take theater, then he has to take a minor, an extra history class in minor, because that's the other thing that he loves. And maybe that will help fuel his interest and engagement.
Vanessa, I think every psychologist who has ever podcasted with us, guested on this podcast, would say the same thing, which is don't strike a deal. Instead, offer him 2 choices. You have 2 choices. You get to do theater, but the problem is extra history.
Right. So the problem is with the 4th child is they are so goddamn savvy that he would look at me and say, yeah, I call bullshit and you're not giving me 2 choices. You're striking a deal. But we'll see. I will do a test case if this is where I end up. I still haven't quite given up hope. But the point is, Cara, that there's any number of things throughout the day, the year, the decade of adolescence where we really believe we know better, where we're concerned either about our kids' well-being or their health and safety or just their pleasure and joy in life. And we see the path that they should take. And yet,
okay, I'm going to be the stick in the mud doctor for a second and just say there are some things that are non-negotiables. Right?
What are your non-negotiables?
Well, like if we know exactly where a behavior is leading and it is leading somewhere physically dangerous, no, you cannot. You can force them to pull back. Okay.
Right.
I think I might have told this story on the podcast before. I don't know, but did I ever tell the story about how I was promoting one of my early books and I was in New York and I was asked to be the guest expert, air quotes, expert on a daytime talk show. I don't remember what talk show it was. I don't remember anything about it except the theme of the show was bad spring break decisions.
Oh my God.
Which is like, we should do that podcast, by the way, because there are lots of them. Bad spring break decisions. And it was like very Jerry Springer style, where the first few minutes, your eyes are so big. I don't think I've told this story. The first few minutes, it was just me chatting with the host about like, yeah, this is why they make bad decisions. Limbic system is dominating prefrontal cortex. It was like very sciencey, gung-ho. And then they bring out the mother and daughter, okay? And the mother and daughter really have, again, a Jerry Springer style fight about, is she allowed to go to South Beach for spring break.
Mm.
And what was amazing was the mom started from a place of hard no, but the daughter was able to essentially berate the mom in front of a very encouraging
Live studio audience.
And like 5 minutes later, the mom is giving her cash to go, not just go. You can go, and here's money to spend. And I'm like sitting on stage thinking, I am not trained to handle this. I don't know what I'm going to say.
They clearly did not know you very well if they had you on stage for that situation.
No, because I did go home. I do distinctly remember this. My children were very young, like nowhere near spring break age. And I was like, guys, you are never going to South Beach, Florida for spring break. And they're like in kindergarten. Okay, mom. But the point being, our kids are very, very good at manipulating us in all the best ways. Manipulation is not always a negative thing. It can often feel negative, but they know how to push our buttons and they know how to play us. They also have very strong passions and desires. That mom on that stage knew that she could stop her daughter from going to spring break. You know how she could stop her daughter?
Not pay for it.
Correct. That is what one of the audience members yelled out. She said, Mama, do not pay for the trip. It was amazing. She could have chosen. So sometimes we get to reframe when it's health and safety. And we get to say, well, we can't force them to make the good decision. We can absolutely not enable the bad decision. And that gets tricky in certain circumstances. I'm not saying it's perfect, but in many circumstances, that is where I draw a really hard line. That leaves like a solid 90% of scenarios where, frankly, they're not health and safety scenarios. They're like, they're not brushing their teeth when they leave the house.
Well, let's talk about that stuff, because that's not, sort of end of world health and safety, but there are real battlegrounds where we know that the value of brushing your teeth, washing your face, putting on deodorant, the small things, which can then lead up to, if not done, cavities, acne, body odor at school, right? Like this sort of incremental stuff. And we can say to a kid every single morning, hey, and I don't ask, did you brush your teeth? Because they're just going to lie to you.
To your face.
To your face.
Halitosis.
Morning in and morning out. But you can say, hey, if you haven't brushed your teeth, can you go upstairs now and please brush your teeth before we leave? And then you haven't asked them a yes or no question. And then, or you can literally just say, go brush your teeth. You can't get in the car with me until you brush your teeth.
Or you can say, I used to do this one. I am literally the only person who's going to tell you your breath smells. And I'm telling you your breath smells. Like I'm doing you a service.
Unless you're in my house, and then everyone else in my house will tell them their breath smells or hand them a piece of gum. So those things that are about, taking care of oneself and hygiene and things that can have social repercussions, it can feel like you can't force them unless you're literally going to go into the bathroom with them and watch them while they brush their teeth, which like I had enough of that when my kids were toddlers. Like if I ever have to stand in the bathroom while my kids brush their teeth again, I think I'll poke my eyes out. But you can, put them in, reframe it, have the conversation, have siblings. I mean, you always talk, Cara, about how older kids, cousins, siblings, camp counselors can kind of get them, or frankly, peer influence gets them to do this stuff. Hey, your teeth are kind of yellow, or your breath is bad, or you have BO or whatever. So we can't force them. But in this case, other people know just as well as we do that it's a value, and it's sometimes their comments that will get a kid to there. Because if you say to a kid, hey, I don't really want to take you to the dentist again to get cavities filled because you're not brushing your teeth, that statement goes in one ear and out the next.
And also, like, little medical fact is so much of cavities is genetic and has to do with the way the enamel
Yes.
is formed. And so when your kid does a good job and then they're at the dentist and they
Right.
have 5 cavities and you feel terrible.
And they blame me because they know I have genetically terrible teeth, and then it's my fault.
That's right. Vanessa, the other thing is that there are a lot of kids who are struggling with a little bit of a mental health or a lot of a mental health issue, and their self-esteem is really low.
Yeah.
And this hygiene is a perfect example where you got to kind of walk a fine line with them, because you want to be honest and you want to save them from bigger social hits at school, essentially. And also you want to make sure that they learn good habits and all that. But if they're feeling really crummy about themselves, and that's when you pile on, it can be a very, very deep wound for them. And sometimes you don't even know they're feeling crummy about themselves. And you do the thing where you tease about the horrible breath, and they just, I've had this happen where they burst out in tears and it's like, I feel terrible about myself because this, and you just piled on and you're the last straw.
Right.
You are. And that feels terrible as the adult in their life. And you can go right in there and just go, I am so sorry. I did not know. I did not know.
I thought I was being helpful. I'm really sorry. Let's talk about exercise for a second, because this is a big sticking point of the things that we would love to be able to force kids to do, and teens and young adults. But again, it's a tough one. So my kids have preseason soccer every August, and they're supposed to get themselves into shape ahead of preseason soccer. And when I tell you that I would rather chew on razor blades than have yet another fight with my kids about preseason soccer, that's too gentle. It's so painful to know that if they don't get in shape, preseason's going to suck. And they're going to feel bad, and they're not going to be able to get the timed mile they need to get, or they're not going to play as well as they want. It's so painful to know that, and then to watch them resist it and fight it. And by the way, I was the same way. I hated getting in shape for preseason. I hated it. I did it half-assly. I did it badly. I did not have anyone breathing down my neck or telling me. I did it eventually over time. But this is one where it's we see the consequences, just neon lights in our face, and yet we can't force them to do what they need to do.
Right. And there are a lot of reasons why you didn't want to do your preseason conditioning. Probably among them was that it marked the end of summer, and that's it's a bummer, right? All this free, joy-filled time is coming to an end. You know what's coming along with the fall season. I think the same scenario is applicable to kids who are not athletes as well. When parents and trusted adults see those kids sitting on a couch, on a device, even reading a book. I've had so many parents come to me saying, my kid is not on screens all the time. They love to read. What do I do with that? Because it's great that they're reading, but they're not moving. And I know they need to move, and I can't force them. So there's a whole spectrum of how do you get a kid to move.
Right.
And, one of the most effective things that you can do is get to the point where they do move, and then you can kind of get into a conversation about how good they feel because they moved. But that, first of all, it's very hard to get them to move in the first place. And second of all, sometimes that conversation comes off as self-righteous, I was so right. Now, how great do you feel? And then if they're at a very specific moment in their individuation, they think, note to self, I see a button. I can choose to not move, and it will annoy her more than it will make me feel good to move. And so I'm going to wield that weapon in the future. So it's this very complicated dance sometimes around how you get them to physically move when they need to, when they they become better versions of themselves when they move.
Right. And some kids need to move because they have so much energy that if they don't get
That's right.
enough exercise, they're going to drive everybody crazy. I mean, I used to have in our apartment, I used to have a little mini trampoline. And when one of my kids had
Every pediatrician's nightmare.
yeah,
Go
I mean,
on.
not just like a little tiny one.
Okay, just for little tiny head injuries.
You know, like the ones they use in OT, the little with the little handle. And I would make them go and jump on the trampoline because I was like, I can't.
Get
you
the
can't go
crazies
out running in the park. It's 6:00 at night, but I need you to I need you to stop. With the kids who are just sort of naturally more sedentary or who love reading or, you know, whatever it is, I think you can say, hey, this is a non-negotiable. You have to get an hour a day of exercise. Let's come up with a list together of the things you can do that feel fun for you that count as physical activity. And because I think a lot of kids think, oh, exercise, that's like going to the gym or playing a sport. And they don't realize that, you know, maybe they have a video game like Dance Dance Revolution, which is like super fun and is great exercise. Or maybe they really love their dog and they can walk their dog. Or maybe they can take an online yoga class. Like, I think there are ways where, to your point earlier, Cara, we're not actually forcing a kid. We're presenting them with other options that are appealing, that allow them to, quote, win, right? To do something they like, and for us to have them do what we need them to do.
Right. And maybe use their medium. Give them something to read that explains why it's important to exercise. Right. That's a double win, right? I also think it bears saying, and we've said this many times before, but we'll tuck it in here. Your exercise can be broken up throughout the day. So for a kid who is more sedentary, 60 minutes is a non-starter for some of those kids. But 10 minutes at a time, 6 times during the day, that's more achievable. And maybe it starts at 4 times a day and you work up towards that minimum of 60 minutes. But it's really, and little things, these are silly little things, but park an extra block away from an appointment that you're taking them to and just walk a little bit more. Take the stairs, not the elevator. Like all the little things that habituate moving. That's a way to answer that you can't force them. You kind of can. Like we're parking here and we're walking an extra block.
Right. Or we're not moving the car or whatever.
Totally.
Also, to expect a 10-year-old or a 12-year-old or a 14-year-old to go out and do something on their own, it's not really realistic. Like they want to do it with you, or they want to do it with a friend, or they want to do it in a group. At like making it something that's social is a more, I think, successful path, unless it's something they're learning how to do and they don't want other kids their age to see them do it until they feel more confident. Sometimes kids want to try something and they feel self-conscious. And so it's actually better to do it with you or just privately or one-on-one with someone until they feel more confident doing it.
Yeah, that confidence piece is actually really important because even as they get older, I have found as my kids get older, they kind of think they should be better at certain things by the time they're older. And if they are new to them, they don't want to try them. So like I used to take my daughter to a yoga class all the time and she would just pop in and then she wouldn't do it for a few months and then she'd pop in again. It didn't bother her at all to be very novice and to just be trying again when she was very young. And then she hit this threshold point, and I can't say exactly when it was, but she started to feel seen in the class. Like she didn't want to be the novice in the room and she didn't feel good enough to be in the room. And it's a little bit that self-awareness piece and it must have been early high school when this started happening. And then she stopped. And I tried everything I could do to get her back in those classes and she would not do it. Wouldn't do it.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's sometimes we're forcing an issue from the surface and we lose sight of getting underneath the hood of the car and figuring out why is somebody pushing back on this? Why is someone refusing? And listen, it's tricky. You know, if it's a sensitive subject to a kid, to get them to open up about why they don't want to do it, that's not an easy ask, but there are ways to do it. So, if you had a kid who was happily participating in something and all of a sudden they're saying, I don't like it, I don't want to go, getting into conversation about why, if you say, what do you mean you don't want to go? I've paid for the semester. You have to go.
Right. You're
And
signed up.
You're signed up. And they say, don't make me go. You can't make me go. I hate it. Well, then you want to get a little bit curious. What's the instructor like? What are the other kids like? What are they being asked to wear for that?
That's right.
My daughter stopped doing gymnastics because she's like, I don't want to wear a leotard in front of all these people. I don't know. It doesn't feel good to me. I'm like basically naked in front of these people. And she stopped doing gymnastics because I was like, can she wear shorts over her leotard? And they said, no. And I said, well, F this. I'm not going to force my kid to wear less clothing than she's comfortable wearing because of that. I mean, so there are times when your kid really knows, and it's about helping them articulate or asking in a way why they're really refusing to do something. I mean, Cara, friendships, unhealthy friendships, questionably healthy friendships, friendships that aren't as supportive as we might like, right?
Toxic
friendships. I mean, this is a huge issue. We get so many questions from parents about this topic when they're concerned about a kid's relationship and they're really not sure how to handle it, what to say, what not to say. And I'll just start with a few sort of baseline comments, and then we can have a conversation about what impact we can or can't have. And I want to refer back to an episode we did with Chris Baum about middle school. It's called Finding the Magic in Middle School. It's a wonderful episode. He's just a fantastic educator and human being. And he used this analogy. So we were talking about middle schoolers and they feel so inauthentic and they seem so conformist and like you kind of don't even recognize your middle schooler sometimes with their hair and their outfits. And you're like, who are they? And he used this analogy. Imagine waking up one morning and you've moved to a new city and you have a new job and you are trying to figure out how to swim in those waters. And you look at what other people are wearing and how they do their hair and how they talk. Like you are just trying to stay afloat. And in order to stay afloat, you are picking up on the signs around you of what makes somebody successful or liked or popular or whatever the case may be. And it was such a beautiful metaphor for understanding why our kids in this incredibly formative stage of life are making decisions about their relationships and about their behavior that really have us wondering if we failed as a parent. Like, did we not communicate to them enough about friendships, the importance of respect in friendships? Did we not communicate to them about how they can be themselves and be authentic? There's a million things that it raises, but he set the stage about understanding why. And there's other reasons, right? We can talk about brain development. There's all sorts of reasons why, but I want to go into this conversation with a little empathy for the kids.
Totally. And I think there are kind of two branches to this conversation. So one is when kids are intoxicated by other kids that make a set of decisions and it just lights up their brain. It's intoxicating and they just want to be around that kid. Good decisions, bad decisions, wild decisions. There's a charisma factor that some kids have. And generally speaking, those most charismatic kids are not making all fabulous decisions. And they have this magnetism to them. I mean, literally, they are like magnets. And other kids are drawn to them for a whole host of reasons. So there's that set of friendships. And those, I think, are easier for us to understand. We can wrap our brains around that because we know charismatic adults, right?
Right. And Lisa Phillips calls it an identity crush, which I thought was such a good phrase. It's like they don't want to be with the person, they want to be the person. Like they're so enamored by this other person.
I still feel it. I still have moments where there are people who come into my life and I'm like, whoa, that is that is who I wish I was.
You
I
mean
wish I had
every day with me when you're on Zoom with me?
How did you know, Vanessa? How did you know?
Can you imagine what the podcast would sound like if we just like, if it was just like identity crushes? It's like, oh, yeah. Oh, yes. I totally agree. It would be the most boring podcast episode in the world. Just like,
we would call it
you're
Yes
right.
Women.
Yes, women.
Yes, women. So that is one bucket. And then there's the other bucket, which is the toxic choices and the choices where you're looking at the friends that your kids are choosing. And you're like, what have I done wrong that this is what they're drawn to? Because it's not a charismatic kid. It's an
or not charismatic to us.
But it's an unkindness or a thoughtlessness or a bullying or a, fill in the blank. And you're like, wow, I am so disheartened that this is what my kid is choosing. And those are two very different lanes. And I think it's worth exploring both, but I just want to lead off with a funny story, which is when I went to college, my mom was semi-insistent that I meet the daughter of a friend of hers. She did not know this girl's mother, but she knew the mother's best friend, and she was insistent. You must meet her. You must meet her. And I was like, not interested. You can't force me. I'm independent. I am not choosing friends that my mother chooses for me. And her name was her nickname from high school that had become the name everybody called her. No one even knew her given name. It was her nickname. And that's how my mom knew her. Well, she goes to college. I never meet her. She says the exact same thing about me. Like, hard no, I am not meeting Cara. Okay, fine. Meanwhile, I'm hanging out every night in my common room with this really great woman who was from New York and, yada, yada, yada. And she's so cool and she's so sophisticated and she's so funny. And her name is, fill in the blank name, right? And it's certainly not the nickname that I was supposed to meet. And we became amazing friends. And then one night over a box of wine, I will tell you, it came out that in high school, everyone called her by her nickname and she wanted to reinvent in college and no one knew the nickname, but she was going to tell me. And she tells me the nickname and I was like, shut the front door. You are the person I refused to meet because my mother was trying to force me to meet you. So case in point, sometimes they do know. Sometimes they do know.
Right. So sometimes they're right. I had a similar thing where an old dear friend of mine who I had reconnected with, it turned out our boys were going to the same college. And we desperately wanted them to be friends. But these are not our first children. These were 18-year-olds. So we knew enough that if we said to them, we desperately want you to be friends, they would immediately never, ever be friends.
Because you can't force them.
Because you can't force them. So we said to look out for each other, no pressure. Coincidentally, they were going to the same event. Oh, look out, no pressure. They ended up meeting, loving each other, and choosing to be roommates with no interference from their mother. So these are the happy stories.
These are the happy stories. So now let's go back to our brand point, which is
right.
Sort of, let's go down the first road, which is when they make the decision to be in the
orbit.
In the orbit. And it's not a healthy dynamic. It's just
right. Because they have no power. It's not a two-way street.
Correct.
They are sort of praying at the altar of this kid.
Right.
So to a kid's defense, sometimes we put ourselves in situations that put us in the atmosphere of someone else that allows us, to breathe the air they breathe, which might mean being invited to certain things that we want to be invited to, hanging out with other kids who we want to hang out with, being included. So while I'm not an advocate for kids sort of giving to a relationship and sort of bending the knee necessarily. I do think that kids will figure out different ways to get themselves included in things that are not always the way we would choose or hope for them to do that. And hopefully it's not morally compromising or compromising of their safety or well-being. But sometimes they're going to get a little creative about how they get to be a part of things. And as concerning as it can be and sometimes we can really judge them, I do think kids need to learn how to navigate situations and how to put themselves in positions that kind of put them where they want to be socially. So I'm not
Well, that's right. I mean,
100% pro or con. I'm just making the observation.
And status matters. I mean, it just does. The pecking order of the social world carries with it a lot of big emotions. And it is unfair for us as adults who love these kids to ask them to completely ignore that hierarchy and let it not impact the way they feel. And if one creative way that they have of navigating, does this matter to me or not, is let me be adjacent to this really charismatic person. Let me see what it feels like to be invited to sit at this table or to be invited to this sleepover. I mean, every single book about middle school drama lands with the really nice kid getting invited to the really popular kid. By the way, the popular kid is not always mean, but in every book, the popular kid is mean. They get invited to the popular kid's sleepover, and then the nice kid's friends who are genuine and it's a healthy relationship feel abandoned, and right. It's like every movie, every book.
Right. So the issue is if your kid is making compromises that feel too far. So I just want to say something up front because we're going to talk about this again with the other scenario. If you say to your kid, I'm sorry, you can't hang out with X super charismatic, magnetic person because I think they're just using you. All your kid is going to want to do is hang out with super charismatic, magnetic person. So refusing them or forcing them to choose a path that really undermines their social viability in this case is not a realistic thing. What the goal is to help them build the awareness and the sense of self-worth that they will make a choice for themselves that protects them. So a really common scenario is a kid will use, their allowance or will use access to activities to get people to hang out with them or include them and stuff. But that's essentially like, I don't want to say buying friendship, but they're not being included for who they are. They're being included for what they have or what they do. And to turn around to say to a kid, you are you're compromising who you are and I won't let you hang out with them. They're just hanging out with you because you give them money or Doritos, which is what it was in my day. You've the best snack.
Equivalent. Yeah.
Right. Then that goes nowhere. But if you say to a kid, hey, I'm noticing that you're hanging out with these people. I'm wondering, what's the sort of evolution of how you guys decide to hang out? How do they decide if they're going to hang out at our house or they're going to hang out with someone else? Helping them build the awareness, hopefully. And by the way, credit to kids. They know. They're not dumb. Mm-mm. They're just willing to make certain compromises in certain situations. But again, if we force it, if we forbid them, then they're just going to cleave even stronger to whatever situation we don't want them to be in.
My daughter had an experience when she was in middle school. No, I take that back. She was a freshman in high school. And, there's a lot of resorting that happens at these gating moments through school. 8th grade is a very common resorting year. So in the beginning of 9th grade, she was sort of casting about for who were my friends going to be. And she fell into a group of kids that, frankly, Vanessa, they're really nice kids. They would come over and I would sit with them and have dinner and we'd have a terrific conversation. They were super fun and they were adorable.
You were very happy.
I was very happy. They were, unbeknownst to me, making really dumb decisions. And I thought, I do this for a living. I have it all figured out. But I didn't have it all figured out. They were just really good. They were in that charismatic bucket and they had me wrapped around their fingers. And I still to this day like them. I like them as people. They're terrific.
Great people can make dumb decisions.
They made really dumb decisions. And there's a very clear memory in my mind of a conversation I had with my daughter where I was like, they're so wonderful. They're so fabulous. And I remember the look on her face like, you have no clue, but I couldn't quite put two and two together. About 6 months later, she was invited to a 16th birthday party. So now we're like end of 9th, early 10th, those oldest kids turning 16. I guess it was 10th grade probably by now, early 10th. And she goes to the birthday party, and the birthday party involves seeing the Rocky Horror Picture Show. And that movie only plays at midnight. And there's one theater near us that shows it. And there's always a line out the door, and it's a whole thing. And it's very ritualistic. And the kids, like, it's big, right? It's like a moment. And I got a call from the bathroom of the theater. And it was like, Mom, there's some really bad decisions being made right now. I'm good, but when this birthday party is over, I'm out. And it was so interesting to me because if I had understood sort of the holistic nature of these kids, I probably would have tried to force interference and say, you don't want to hang around these kids. But I liked what they presented to me.
Right.
Right. And they're, by the way, flash forward all these years, they're terrific kids who came out of that phase of their life intact and lovely and wonderful. But she got there not because I knew anything I didn't, and not because I tried to force anything in either direction. She got there because she got there. And for whatever reason, I was lucky enough that she felt comfortable picking up the phone. It was like she needed that safety net. It was a real lesson to me in making sure, like, the first most important thing that we can do as primary caretakers of kids is to let them know that no matter how we feel about a kid, love them, not love them, you call me if you're in a certain situation that feels compromising, right? I won't judge.
And then we have the situation where we know and can see that our kid is in a really bad friendship,
so let's go there.
Romantic relationship.
Yeah.
And we have a wonderful episode on healthy and unhealthy relationships, which I recommend people. And it's a lot more, mostly about romantic relationships. But in this case, the concern is that there's damage being done to our kid, right? So a friend is untrustworthy, is talking behind their back, is ganging up on our kid, is excluding our kid, right? There's any number of ways that these friendships
extorting our kid.
Is extorting, is verbally abusive, is physically abusive, right? There's a lot of ways in which, depending on the age and gender, there's sort of norms that happen. And we are deeply concerned. And yet we know in the back of our heads, if we force a kid to end a relationship, whether it's romantic or friendship, then that's really not going to have any impact. It's only going to make them dig in their heels. So how do we engage with them? Because kids are so aware of when we're judging other kids. They're so sensitive to it. They're so clued in. And, if we try to do our like chill, casual vibe, they, often pick up on that. But again, this is our kids' safety. This is their emotional safety, maybe even their physical safety.
Right. And there are a lot of strategies here, and it really depends upon the dynamic you have with the kid in your life. But one strategy is to own the judgment you have and just put it right out there. I don't really like this kid. Like, I'm sorry, I'm going to be judgmental for a second. I'm going to tell you what my judgment is. Help me see it differently. Tell me, what do you see in this kid so that I can rewrite my narrative on them? Because this is the evidence I have that's pointing me here, but I am open to hearing what you like about them.
Yeah. I mean, I have a couple of similar tactics. One is hey, I don't think I get a good sense of this kid because when adults are around, they're kind of quiet. What are they like when they're just with kids? I'd love to
I like
hear
that one.
what they're like. Because oftentimes the kids who, to your point earlier, Cara, the kids who sit down at the dinner table with us and engage, we love, even if our kids know underneath that there's all sorts of other things going on. It's the kids who don't engage, the kids who are quieter, that we have concerns about. So that's one way to do
I
it.
love that.
Another thing that I have found successful is sort of separating the kid's behavior from the kid themselves. So we could say something like, hey, I know so and so is actually like a good kid, but I wasn't crazy about what I saw them doing at homecoming the other night. Can you talk to me a little bit about like how do you manage it when you have a good friend who's doing stuff that you know is kind of a dumb idea?
Now, the hard thing with that approach, and I've done that many a time, is that sometimes it elicits the answer, I know you don't like them.
Right.
I know you don't like them. And so I'm going to shut this conversation down, pivot this conversation, whatever it is. And that's a hard one to come back from, Vanessa, because you don't like them. Like it's a fair call. You might not like them as a human, but you don't like them as a friend for your kid in this moment right now, right?
Right.
That makes you nervous.
Well, and I had this situation where somebody reported, my daughter said something and somebody reported what she said to the person. And thank God it was something like totally off. It was just like a dumb, offhanded thing to say. And I was more interested in the friend who chose to share with another person what my daughter had said. And I was like genuinely curious. I said, oh, did you confront her about like sort of sharing this comment that you made? And she said, no, I didn't. And I said, but like, wouldn't you expect loyalty from a friend not to share this thing? And she said, well, you know what, Mom? I actually know this is someone I can't really trust with private stuff. And I had realized that, but this situation only reinforced it. And so I just know there's certain things I can and can't tell this person, but I don't want to confront them because then it's going to turn into a whole big thing. And I don't want to spend my energy on that.
Right. Where my brain is going is we sit in different roles in our relationships with different kids. And there's the role we play in the relationship with the kids who live in our house. We play a very different role in the lives of kids with whom we are connected, but they're not our children.
Right. Because they actually listen to us.
Bingo. And especially when it comes to toxic friendships and relationships, it is so much easier for some kids, many kids, to hear the downsides of being involved in a toxic or unhealthy friendship or relationship from their trusted aunt, from their older sibling, from their godparent, from their coach or mentor than from their parent.
Right. And amplify that to everything we've talked about, which is right. Sometimes we need to find a surrogate. We need to find a stand-in, whether it's about, I'm going to come back to the theater topic, whether it's about, a talent we want them to pursue, whether it's about a hygiene issue or exercise, whether it's about friendships, whether it's about a romantic relationship. There's in any of these cases, sometimes they just can't hear it from us and we can't force them, but a gentler influence from someone else they trust. Or frankly, we wrote this in the book, like sometimes our kids will tell the hairdresser something and take 100%. The advice from the hairdresser, advice that we've given them 20 times that they would never take from us.
Or sometimes you have a very close friend who you think is going to give them great advice as an adult, and they give them terrible advice. And you're like, ay, did this just take 3 steps backwards? And it becomes an opening to a conversation like, okay, what did she say? And what do you think of that? And then you can both have a great laugh and it can bond you. I mean, there are so many ways this can go, Vanessa, but ultimately, I think this is an important thing. At the top, we led with, you can't force them, but sometimes you have to, right? There are certain physical safety.
Right.
If a friendship or a relationship is putting them in direct danger, if they are being physically harmed or you think they might harm themselves, this moves to a different category.
Correct.
Where we're not going down the road of, I can't make you, but instead we're going down the road of, danger, Will Robinson, I need to do something. I need to keep you safe. And I'm going to bring in a team of people, because if I can't do it alone, there are people in your life. It might be someone from school. It might be your pediatrician. It might be a coach. It might be, but I need help from other people. This is a safety issue.
Right. And often kids know a lot more, their friends know a lot more than we do. And so figuring out how to garner support, how to basically stage an intervention without having our kid feel betrayed. And I have to tell you, sometimes we have to do what may feel like a betrayal to them in order to keep them safe. And this is the moment where we're not their friends. We're their parents. And we have to do stuff that allows them to be safe, even at the risk of our, being liked by them, for lack of a more charged term, aka them hating us in the moment.
I mean, we are not there. I think this is the perfect place to land, which is, we are not their friends. We want to one day have a close and connected relationship that feels like a friendship with our kids. But this is why we have a different name, right? We are their parents. It's like we go to work. We don't call it we go to fun. Sometimes we have fun at work, but, and the same is true there. We do have a job, and the job has a hard line. And so
and they'll often thank us later.
Yes.
Not always. They will often recognize and appreciate later. But again, we're not doing it for the recognition.
No.
And we're definitely not doing it for the pay.
No.
We're doing it because we have a role and a responsibility. And sometimes that means like letting them lead and trusting them, as what happened with Talia, and sort of them figuring it out.
That's right.
But when the stakes are really high, really, really high, there are moments where we just make the call and that's it.
So maybe the title of this episode should be, we can't force them, but some of the time we can.
You've never met an ellipsis or in parentheses, an aside that you didn't love.
Oh my gosh. It is so true. We're totally putting an ellipsis into this title. Very excited about that. All right, Vanessa, good luck.
Oh God. I just remembered I still have to deal with this. Okay. We'll do a postscript to this episode on what ended up happening.
Maybe he can act it out.
Oh, he'll mock me mercilessly. He'll come on and do the pitch perfect impersonation of me. So
proving your point.
Yes, exactly. Thanks, Cara.
Bye, Vanessa.
Thank you so much for listening. You can email us with questions, feedback, or episode requests at podcast@lessawkward.com.
If you want to learn more about what we do to make this whole stage of life less awkward for everyone involved, our parent membership, our school health ed curriculum, our keynote talks, and more are all at lessawkward.com.
And if you want products that make puberty so much more comfortable, visit myumla.com.